Hey people, I'm so glad to be here. This is amazing. Whenever I get to come to MIT and share a little bit, it's like mind-blowing. So fantastic. So much to talk about, and I really want to get down to some concrete stuff. I've been keeping my ears open these past couple of days for some of the things that you're looking for. So some of this stuff is new, and forgive me for stumbling occasionally. I'm from New York. A little bit about myself. I was born in the early 1960s, and the problem started immediately. My mom was a nice Jewish girl from north of Houston. My father, a Puerto Rican from south of Houston, and when they got together, nobody liked that. On top of which, she got pregnant. She was 15 years old, early 60s, scandal. This is a real West Side Story situation, very, very difficult. And unfortunately, I was born in a hospital near a women's shelter in Staten Island, a forceps baby, and that I was big, my mom was small, damaged the seventh facial nerve, created a facial paralysis. I was put into foster care, and my mom spent some time trying to get me out of there, and she did. She succeeded. She took me from there to unite with Jose, and we moved into the projects, the Baruch projects in the Lower East Side of New York City. That year that I was in foster care was filled with love. I was with the Brady Bunch. It was the dog, the white picket fence, and they fed my imagination. I was taken from that environment and put into pretty much as rough and tumble as it gets. So although I was Superman, there's my little sister Tammy, and that's my mom, you can see how young she was even then. I was embracing the monsters. You see a little rover there on my lap? I loved cartoons. Particularly, I mean, it was difficult. I was so different from the people around me that I just puzzled them, and I was also upset because I thought that I lived in New Rochelle with the Brady Bunch. So I became, very difficult, and the discipline that Latinos in the 60s asserted on very, very little kids, it was hard knocks, guys. So I sought escape, and the things that drew me, that attracted me, were actually stories that were kind of serious. I loved early Japanese animation, Speed Racer and Gigantor and Tobor the Eighth Man. These were life and death cartoons that would vanish with the tidal wave of Hanna-Barbera in the 70s. But I really dug that, and I would always be disappointed when the show was over. I wanted that fantasy world to continue. I wanted to be enveloped, cocooned by fantasy. So I began to fabricate my own and surround myself. My bedroom became my refuge, and whatever toys I could scrabble up, some plastic dinosaurs, a dish rag, a broken toy soldiers, together would make these epic narratives on my bed top, and I would want to make them more and more rich, more sophisticated, just so that I could kind of keep my head in there. Now, I had to go to school, and it got pretty rough. The situation was that when you're different at that time in this kind of situation, you're going to get knocked around. I was bullied and made fun of. Why is your mouth like that? Twisted mouth. It was rough stuff. I learned how to move up to the threshold of my classroom and look through and gauge really quickly who was going to be the most likely to make fun of me or smack me around or something like that. In more recent times, I've come to call this threshold assessment. Just figuring out the dynamics. And you know, kind of making yourself small and slinking around, that's not going to work when your mom lets your hair grow down to your shoulders, and you're wearing glasses in the second grade. So what I started to notice was that when the bullies walked in the room, the people around them, their behavior suddenly locked into place. There was the expectation that this guy was going to act rotten, so you turned away. You kind of gave him wide berth, and or you paid homage or whatever. And this was something that I picked up on, and so you know I'd open up my ears and I'd hear maybe that that this dude was into snakes. Or he liked motorcycles or something like that. And I'd go home and I'd study that stuff. I would ask neighbors, give me the information. I need to know about motorcycles. You have no interest, Jeffrey, in motorcycles whatsoever. And I go, no, just give it to me, to my neighbors and stuff like that. And they would. And I'd go up to these guys and maybe mutter under my breath a few things about what they're doing when they're fixing their bike or something like that. And they'd give me these foul looks. It's not like love or anything. But lo and behold, when I'd be thrown up against chain link fences in the schoolyard a day or two later for my daily smack around, I at some point I'd hear someone say, "Yo, leave him alone." And the guy would stop and turn, and there was that bully. And he'd go, you know, brushed my shirt and walked away. And there I'd be standing with the bully, awkwardly, because this is not an ABC after-school special. We're not going to become close friends. But it was a very important lesson. The lesson was that guy was not used to being heard. That guy was not used to somebody doing a little homework and figuring out what he liked. And that was interesting to him. That gave me a pass. I'd grow up to talk to kids about bullying, and I have a little program called Never Surrender. Here I am with a rap star, Baby J, and together we went on tour and talked about bullying in schools. Well, you know, Dad departed to Puerto Rico in '69, and a few years later, my mom figured that if we're going to be poor, let's be poor in Hawaii. They have good social service. I didn't mind. I would be 6,000 miles closer to Japan. In Hawaii, I discovered manga, Japanese comic strips, and they were awesome. Why? Because they were serious, and they were about artificial men in search of their souls, and monsters, and epic clashes between good and evil. I discovered Kikaida, this amazing superhero who would defend children against terrorist organizations comprised of mechanical monsters. And these guys would kick their asses. They would rip limbs off the monsters and beat the monsters with their limbs. This was 1974, 75, and the Japanese, they didn't fool around. What was fascinating was that the manga comic would conclude. These comic books didn't go on forever like Superman or Batman. They would end. And then sometimes the TV series would pick up where the comic book left off, or tell the story from a different perspective. Sometimes, like when the Kikaider series ended, his brother got a series, and it would be Kikaider 01, and it would be a whole new storyline where Kikaider would just show up every now and then, but his brother had most of the storyline. And then at the end of that series, everybody died, because that's what the Japanese do. The bad guy got away, and Kikaider had to unite with Kikaider 01 to confront the bad guy in a feature film in 3D that you had to go to the movies to see. That was awesome. In Japan, they let you, as a creator, move from one medium to the next in order to tell your story. They celebrate the storyteller as a multi-platform artist, and that's how there was this consistency and coherence and sophistication to this children's entertainment that I knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. Uh-oh, problems. Mom wanted to go home. New York City, 1976, 77. You thought it was rough in the 60s. It only got worse. It was really, really a dark time. I was headed toward Japan, remember? No, I'm back where I started from, and not happy, and an adolescent, and starting to recognize something that was lurking in the back of my mind as a child that was now emerging. I became concerned in my home about the door to the apartment. I would go and check the door because something could get in. I checked the lock. I would go away and think about the lock and go back to make sure that I locked it. I'd go back again and again, and sometimes I'd have to actually turn the lock to open the door in order to shut the door and make sure it was locked. And that was one thing. I could almost reason myself through that. But if I'm on the 13th floor, why am I worried about the window? Checking the window, check it again. What the hell's gonna get in? I had to check. Cabinet doors, drawers. This is not pleasant, and it's defying my own sense of intelligence, my own sense of logic, and I had to take that action in order to make the intrusive thought go away. It was as if everything was firing in my mind at the same time, and that brought me to dark places. I began to think about what those thoughts meant and what they implied, and the horrors that lurked in the shadows, the demons that haunted me. And I wanted to be a good guy. And so I asked myself, how can I be good if this evil is dominating my mind? It was a secret, absolute secret. No one could know this. So I began to think about being other people, other persons, and there was this schism. You know, there I am lurking around movie theaters with horror film triple features in Times Square in the middle of the night at 13, 14, 15 years old, when really all I wanted to do was go to Middle Earth and chill with Gandalf. Middle Earth didn't win for a while, guys. It was I was in danger, and no kid should be afflicted as such. And we're fortunate that we know enough about such afflictions to be able to recognize and deal with them. At that bottom, I began to tell myself stories. After all, the friends around me were dying. It was 80, 81, 82 in New York. This was a truly, truly deadly time. And these stories that I'd amuse myself with began to, I don't know, preoccupy me and delight me. The more detail I put into the stories that I told myself that involved the heroes from my childhood and from popular culture and their values, I began to kind of claw my way up. And I realized maybe it was that primal memory of the fact that I'd known unconditional love and absolute safety once that made me understand that it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. So I scrapped together enough to put myself into Queens College. I think that took about $500 at the time. I discovered in their student union a group of kids who were playing Dungeons and Dragons. What, you mean I could still play make-believe? I could still tell crazy stories and people would pay attention to me? I'm in. And here was this system of rules that allowed for a storyteller to make the story participative. And you know what? I would take these guys, and some of them were not Dungeons and Dragons players. Some of them were sort of semi-friends. All right, some of them were bullies from the neighborhood, and I'd have to convince them to come to my house and play this crazy game. So I used a combination of heavy metal album covers, the fact that Pizza would be there, and Pink Floyd, and I would ask them questions. What would you do in this scenario? What would what's your wish? What's your desire? What kind of weapon would you hold in the medieval days and so forth? And they would answer me. And they got intrigued, and they would sit down, and I would take those aspirations of theirs and thread them through my story, set in this fantasy world. There it is, Corridor, and they would become excited, and they came back week after week, and I moved this Dungeons and Dragons campaign onto the college campus, and there'd be 5 people, then 7, then 10, then 15. At some point, 20 people would be sitting around this table while I was doing it real fast and building this world alive around these people. There'd be an audience to watch it because there would be this drama going on, and it was real successful. And of course, for me, it was firing all those little sparkles in my head and occupying them and taking something that was a tangled morass and tying it up in a bow. It was making me less anxious, less preoccupied, less worried, and it didn't go away, but at least there was focus. and it allowed me to become productive. I had a little redeeming to do. So after college, in the mid-1980s, during the Dinkins administration, all you needed to do really is leave a little condensation on a hand mirror, and you can become a teacher. That's the school in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, and I taught creative writing there and utilized these role-playing game skills and the fact that I was still watching Voltron and He-Man and listening to LL Cool J to really engage these kids in a kind of pop culture curriculum that took off, that was really successful. So much so that I began to write about it, and I was still playing these games, and I was discovering the answer for me. I wasn't going to become a novelist. I wasn't going to go to Hollywood and make movies. But this gadget that connected people and allowed them to participate in stories that they conglomerated together remotely, that was awesome. So I began to talk about, in this magazine, I wrote about it, the notion that story was going to jump different platforms. It hadn't happened in America yet. Star Wars was only just kind of getting underway. So I just started envisioning how a narrative would surround us, enable us to interact with it, and become fully participative. I started to experiment with that when I kind of went into the workforce. The writing got recognized, and I was asked to come develop tabletop games and then video games. And this is my game, Turok Dinosaur Hunter, in the early 90s for the Nintendo 64. This game, during its first weekend, grossed $90 million. Nothing had done that before in video games, and it was accompanied by something called a website, where the backstory that I invented for the world, which didn't fit into the game, you can go read that. And there was comic books that supported the narrative. Even the instruction book told you more about the story world. And the kids went wild. During interviews, I would give my email address, my AOL address, and I'd say, come write to me. Little did I realize, hundreds of thousands of emails came in, and they all wanted the cheat code. But I would ask them to tell stories about their adventures in the game and what they liked and what they didn't, and it created this amazing bond of loyalty. I did it again with Magic the Gathering. If you know that trading card game, the world of Magic the Gathering is partly based on my Dungeons and Dragons campaign. The backstories of a lot of those characters I created and kind of exist to this day. So two kind of big hits led me to start thinking about a formalized process by which you can tell stories across multiple platforms. It was so unfamiliar. I was sneaking around doing that. That website and those interviews and so forth, that was all free. I got interns to do at the company, and because it didn't cost anything, nobody stopped me. Now it costs a little something. So I just started to understand in the 90s that young people were going to absorb story in a radically different way from the way we did. There is far less linearity in the way that young people are plugged into the media, but the media was not developing its content, its creativity in this way. I also understood that story was a real prime factor in the way young people learned and in the way they were drawn to intellectual properties. And so I would constantly try and push at my friends in video gaming to add more and more narrative component and elicit a more emotional response from the gameplay that was going on. Ultimately, I founded Starlight Runner Entertainment in 2000 and went out and tried to sell this kind of formal transmedia process. What is transmedia storytelling? To me, it's a technique. It's a methodology to convey messages, themes, or storylines to a mass audience through the artful and well-planned use of multiple media platforms. I just have to throw that art thing in because storytelling is rarefied. Storytelling is something that we need to celebrate as a talent. And if you're just tossing your stuff out on different media platforms, it's just not going to work very effectively, not for very long. Think of the various media platforms that we have access to as individual instruments. Lord knows that all that noise surrounds us. It's like this pervasive ocean of broadcast and interactivity. What if you can design from the get-go and a kind of orchestral narrative that layers these different media and has them kind of intertwining like a sort of narrative tapestry. Instead of just picking one medium to communicate your ideas or your story world into, what if you just developed that story world on a kind of platform neutral basis and extended it out to play to the strengths of many different media? That's what we offered, and they came. They came with some interest. The Disney company said, "Can you take Pirates of the Caribbean and #1, make us understand it a little better?" Because it was the smash hit that was very unexpected, and they wanted to be able to create Pirates content on all these different platforms, and they weren't doing it very well. So it took a little study, a little analysis, and what we came back with was, well, you need to understand how Pirates of the Caribbean is connected to Disney as a brand, the movie that is, not the theme park ride, and you need to pay respect to the story world. You are emphasizing Johnny Depp and Keira Knightley and Orlando Bloom, but this is actually kind of a fabulous, rich, deep environment, a world that has a past, a present, and a future. And if you tell stories set in that world that are true to the spirit of the films, you're going to get deeper engagement, and they did. Hasbro and Transformers facing a unique challenge because the movies were so very different from the essence of the Transformers brand. What is the Transformers toy? It's about mastering the transition between two very, very different shapes. And there is a thematic echo in the transformation of young boys. You know, if they could do this, then maybe their growing up is not going to be something too difficult. Maybe they can master becoming bigger themselves. We helped Hasbro to infuse that into the content that wasn't the feature films, though in the more recent movies, you're starting to see more and more of that component being pushed in. So people, midway mark, I'm standing in Playa Vista, California, next to James Cameron on the set of Avatar. Helping him to organize the story world, to explore what it means to see you. Zoe Saldana is running around, and Sigourney Weaver, and they're all wearing these contraptions, and it's just awesome. Look at what's possible. Avatar Transmedia, so-so, but it won't be that way again. The studio was caught unawares the first time, not ever again. And we helped, and it was, some of the stuff was pretty good. We did this with video games like Halo for Microsoft, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for Nickelodeon, preparing it for a new generation of kids, and The Amazing Spider-Man. If you go to that Daily Bugle Tumblr log, you'll see storylines that are in the first and second films that are in canon and are so nerdy, geeky cool. I have a great job. Okay, so let's get down to the brass tacks. This is where we do a little learning. What are the criteria to make your intellectual property successful across multiple media platforms? Now, this is a condensation because I don't have that much time, but these are the main points. Number one, your story world must lend itself to a deep, rich past, present, and future. It has to be worthy of devotion. Think about the things that you love in popular culture. They're detailed. They have substance to them. Number two, there's a convincing presentation. You have to take your audience seriously, even if what you're conveying is cute or funny or goofy or scary. You've got to have integrity, consistency, and some kind of logic. Even if it's a weird logic, it has to be something that kind of can be replicated. If you don't, too many questions are going to crop up in your audience's mind, and if they're not answered, they start to lose interest. Take them seriously, even very young children. And there is the vaunted storyteller. We are not advocates of narrative by committee. There does need to be that rarefied visionary, but he needs to be, or she needs to be, flanked by what we call IP stewards, people who will defend and protect the integrity of the story world above office politics or interdivisional conflicts or anything that can interfere. The best story worlds for children help them grow up, and it's amazing how many properties we encounter where that does not happen. Here is a quick rule of thumb for gauging what it is that you're working on that can allow for this transition, not simply to happen on screen, but at least to be alluded to. We start as very young children, so it's just about ourselves. The first thing we come into contact with after that and become aware of is family, the home environment, the outside world, the connection to friends, community, and the greater world beyond that. So when I talk about those thresholds, think about designing your world in such a way that there is something beyond the borders of your narrative. Something that you can allude to that is going to be encountered when the character has made a certain amount of progress when they get older. It doesn't even have to happen in the context of your app or your episode or even your season of television, but it is something that's out there so that we're not isolated and placed in a stasis. Children want to progress. Innately, they are curious and want to go. Tell them that there's someplace to go. Mattel came to us with Hot Wheels, okay? They had a whole mess of cars that they wanted to celebrate because it was the 35th anniversary. And they had never put really any kind of story around the Hot Wheels cars. But Barbie had been doing well with the videos and things like that, so they thought they'd experiment with Starlight Runner and approached me with the possibility. I took it, but I understood their concerns. If we told the story poorly about this die-cast metal car, it could damage the brand. So I had to do a little threshold assessment. What is the brand essence? Give me all your data. I want to see everything for the past 35 years that you've done with Hot Wheels. And we distilled it to speed, power, performance, and attitude. Those are the things that made Hot Wheels a little bit different from Matchbox or Johnny Lightning or Corgis. And we looked at this and we thought about the times that we were living in. This was just after 2001. And I thought, you know, to fine-tune the resonance of a brand that might have gotten a tiny bit dusty, let's include something that I felt was going to connect with what parents would like for their children to think about. And in this case, it wasn't necessarily just winning the race. It was joining with the team, uniting, so to speak. And so we selected a diverse cast, including a character named Brian Kadeem, and move forward with that. And so our theme became, you become stronger when you align yourself with others. And slowly but surely, Mattel caught on to this and got excited and allowed us to develop a multi-platform strategy for the Hot Wheels World Race campaign. And it did really well. And it was our first true transmedia campaign after Starlight Runner started. So much so that Hot Wheels, that cartoon story world, started as World Race and reincarnated itself twice as Acceleracers and as Battle Force 5. For more than 10 years, this intellectual property has kept itself going. Bravo, Mattel. All right, so who are these kids? The Frank Magid company calls them pluralists. I don't know that that's the greatest name for them, but it's better than Gen Z. Look at that list and look at the picture next to it. It's amazing how they smacked an entire generation right on the nose with Frozen. Helicopter parents, gender parity. It's amazing to me, but boys are okay with cute. When I was a kid, every toy had to be horrific looking for boys. Now it can be a little hamster thing. Oh, that's great. And girls are empowered. Amazing. So we are seeing this amazing superhero on screen. Isn't it funny that it wound up being in a Disney movie as opposed to a Marvel movie? Okay, less good versus evil and more, why are they yelling at me? Diversity, and of course, multi-platform participation. These kids, it's no longer about the fact that maybe we should listen. We have to. We have to listen to them, or else they're going to go away because something else is going to listen to them. So that architecture for dialogue has to be built into the implementation that you're working on. Their attention is limited. They love following breadcrumbs. They love taking hints that move them from one medium to the next. You either have to be both authentic and have high quality, or be authentic. And that's where YouTube comes in. There's a fluidity that they enjoy following from one medium to the next, or through the narratives that they interact with. There is diversity. There is the fact that they are social, younger and younger and younger, and that's only going to continue. My daughter's on Instagram. She's 11. And they're the most published, and going to be the most published human beings in history. And they're going to be used to it. There she is, my girl, shooting a horror film on her iPhone at Raritan Bay last October. That poor little girl suffered for her art. But at the same time, we have to be responsible for teaching them media literacy. I know we're going to push the time limit, forgive me, but we have to understand the essence of our message, of our brands, of our products. You have to start with a vision. You have to be able to gather the data that you need to make sure that you are playing on the frequency that is being received by this group of young people. You have to make sure that that theme is going to be aspirational and something that is going to be well received and not a cliche. And the archetype of that character has to remain rock solid as you pursue this. Balancing what is primal and what is civilized within yourself will allow you to achieve a state of grace. That theme informs the best Pirates of the Caribbean content. It is what allowed for Disney to crack that intellectual property. Our imaginations free us to build a world for the benefit of all. Look how that informed the Lego movie and made it the success that it is today. You can get a little wild and take an object and kind of look at it in a way that can spawn a story. The bonds between us can be stretched, but if you pull it too hard, it gets all messed up and stuff like that, and you can't use the slinky anymore. So think about those drivers of aspiration. Whether it's, these are just examples of them, silliness, outrageousness, to be gross, or to be empowered or in control. The archetypes, so important. There are sets of these, and we can go into all that another time. But holding on to those archetypes and not moving too far from them will maintain the integrity of your character. And of course, don't forget those distant mountains, those narrative elements that show you that there's something over the horizon that would be worth getting to, worth exploring. And then you have to think about how this plays across different media platforms, what the strengths and weaknesses of each of those platforms are so that you could tell the story well on those platforms. Finally, all the things that I told you, they sound so commercial. But, and you know, I've made a few bucks. But there's something more, and I think if you know me at all, you know that in a way there was always a plan. Stories can affect change. There is a way for story to activate entire populations. Think about the impact that All in the Family had on the discussion of race, or Will and Grace on the discussion of homosexuality. By infusing story with the archetypes and values that we derive from a common mythology of a people, you can capture their imaginations and fire those imaginations. There's a methodology now to empower storytellers on the ground in places where people are dealing with crime, corruption, extremist dogma, and ways to empower their storytellers to speak and be heard. And when people are heard, we see that they actually can behave differently. They don't have to stand for what is happening to them. They are invisible people who can make themselves visible. So by taking this methodology and adapting it into these 9 steps, you can do this. All right, so there's vision, there's data capture, there's finding those emergent universal qualities within a population, making sure that it's rooted not necessarily in their religion or their popular culture, but in their mythology, in the values espoused by what they have been since the dawn of their people. And pulling the aspirational themes and archetypes from that, and empowering storytellers within, not to be asserted by Americans on them, but empowering their storytellers to start telling those stories, and getting people to stand up and cheer, and more importantly, providing them with social services to get them to stand up and act. You can create this dialogue and generate this empowerment that can affect change. Really, really you can. I'm not the only one involved in doing this, but I have done it. We have worked in Mexico in a situation where there is a lot riding against that population. And have positively impacted regions, large regions of the country. In Colombia, we are working with the government and promoting peace and things like entrepreneurism using these very techniques, and they are impacting large populations. And finally, we are doing this in educational facilities around the world, allowing for young people to teach their teachers software or teach one another software. This is distributed, and there are mechanisms using ed tech, but also using that architecture for dialogue and listening that is allowing the acceleration of that process. Guys, it's been an amazing journey, one that is nothing short of a miracle for me, because I get to focus this chaos into something that is actually getting stuff done. And my word to you is never surrender. As if I can do it, you can. Thank you so much. We create worlds. Thank you. These are, I'm so terrible, I'm sorry. These are some resources, but most of all, you now have me as a resource. My gift to Sandbox Summit and the wonderful people who put on this conference is that I will make myself available to you if you have questions or thoughts or need me to take a look at something or whatever. That's how to reach me. That's even my email address. Write incomplete sentences. I can't believe I have to tell teachers to do this, but boy, do I have to tell, just remind me what's going on. And I promise, it takes time, but I will get back to you. Do we have any time?
That's a great gift.
Oh, thank you.
That's a great gift.
Thank you.
I think we can ask 2 quick questions because we're on our rocket launch schedule. So 2 questions. Sam's got one over there. Ira.
Good morning, Jeff. Many of us here work in smaller groups, not-for-profits, sometimes funded by philanthropies or government grants. Many of us have even been funded to do transmedia projects. There are several people in the room I know who work on ready-to-learn programs and the like. You've worked with very large, very well-funded organizations. A lot of us don't have the wherewithal to do the types of planning or the resources, particularly publishing across multiple platforms and media, to accomplish what you've accomplished with Disney and Sony and others. Do you have any recommendations for how to achieve that multiple platform publishing for smaller organizations? And if not, how do you pitch the larger ones with good ideas that are percolating upwards?
First of all, when we do our geopolitical work, we are sometimes, the first thing we're doing is looking at the world through the eyes of the people on the ground there and what they have access to. And what's fascinating, of course, is that they have access to mobile phones and maybe the web, but maybe not. So we're with old-fashioned hard copy content or plays or using music and so forth. Remember, the beauty of this technique is that you're infusing this essence into content that they're already exposed to. So you do need cooperation, the cooperation of the storytellers on the ground there, but it often doesn't cost a whole lot. Working with the matter at hand is vital. But then there is a growing body of evidence that these techniques work. I mean, if I'm working with Special Operations Command and they don't want to spend a lot of money on me because I'm not a missile, it can work for them too. There's a way to be persuasive and to build a case for this kind of funding, and we're seeing this kind of funding happening more and more often through large funding organizations. Okay? Yeah.
One of the things that you mentioned is that the generation coming up is going to be the most published. What's the role of fan fiction? What's the role of giving kids ownership in building the canon?
Wow. The first time I talked about fanfic and its journey to the canon of popular culture was at MIT about 6 or 7 years ago. We're closer than ever to that actually happening. I am an ardent believer in guided user-generated content. I love the idea that at some point soon, and it can start with a lot of the projects that I've heard about in this room, the user can be invited to contribute creative content in such a way that it is actually additive to the experience. And the better that content is, the more it's kind of upvoted, the closer it becomes to becoming a canonical extension of the story world. I think you'll even see in Kindle worlds through Amazon that at some point, some of those stories can be embraced as canonical, the way that James Blish named James Kirk, James Tiberius Kirk, and that became canonical. So I'm a big proponent of fanfic and the ultimate integration of fans into story. Think about where I came from. My stories were told by a half a dozen people sitting around the table who cooperatively, communally created a narrative. I think we can do that on an epic scale now, okay? I'm going to be floating around throughout the day, so if you have more questions, be my guest.
Terrific.
Okay?
Thank you. And before you go, oh, all right, applaud, applaud, applaud.
All right, thanks.